Okay, so this video is directed more at people from YouTube who I don't know personally and who don't attend classes regularly at the center. And the topic is humility. And I think it's going to be a difficult video to make. It's the subject of humility is profoundly underrated in the Christian world. And I don't mean it's underrated by the saints. I don't mean that it's underrated by good theologians. But in the Christian community, the topic and subject of humility is not given nearly enough attention. And I think it is a massive problem in Christianity. And probably responsible for why so many people fail to ascend the heights of spiritual progress and spiritual growth. And frankly, out of 7 stages, most Christians never get past stage 3. And honestly, most of them don't get past stage 2. So the Christian community suffers deeply. And I want to go into a whole bunch of reasons of why that is. So maybe I think it's best to start with just an overview of what the Christian religion is really meant to bring about. So, we say it's salvation, and it is, there's no doubt, but salvation is an interesting term, and what does that really mean? Mostly, I think Christians focus on, and rightly so, on the fact that if you become saved and you enter into a relationship with Christ, you're no longer under the law, you're under God's grace, and you will go to heaven. To heaven you will go. And that is true. But it also means that if you accept Christ and accept Christ's grace, that you are already on the way to heaven. And those aren't the same thing. One, if I say, okay, I've got Jesus and I'm going to heaven, that could allow me to live a relatively shallow spiritual life, not transcend my psychological and emotional disorder, remain somewhat of a sinner, not intentionally, but very sick, spiritually sick in many ways, and just be content with the fact that I'm saved and that I'm going to heaven. And I think that's mostly true. I think that's mostly true, but here's the problem that creates in the world. So we're supposed to be bringing people to Christ. And I don't have a very good gift for bringing people to Christ. I'm better at people who already have a deep commitment to spiritual growth. I'm better at bringing those people to Jesus. And then once those people are into Jesus, I'm better at helping people ascend higher stages of spiritual growth. I'm not the best evangelist, and I realize that. But think of the concept of evangelization, that we are meant to be a sign of Christ in the world, that we're really meant to be that. How do you think it appears to a secular person who may be an atheist, may just be undecided or agnostic, or may have been brought up in a different religion of some kind? How well do you think Christianity represents Christ if people can look into us and see all of the same psychological and emotional disorders that every other human being has? And also keeping in mind that, we're not all equal in this sense. I mean, we're all created equal by God. But then we have different upbringings, we have different personas and sensitivities and potentials and different characters, I guess is the best way to say it. And so we could be saved and often appear sicker psychologically and emotionally than a non-Christian. A non-Christian who just had a great upbringing, was loved deeply, had a lot of things in place, could be raised, and look at a Christian and say, I don't see the attraction possibly. And I think that's going on in the world today. There's, I don't think it's as big of a problem as some people would like to say, but it is a real problem that us Christians are not ascending the paths of holiness. We're not reaching our potential in this life. And so that is a sort of a degradation of Christianity. If you read the early church fathers, if you read their literature, it can seem like you've never been exposed to Christianity before. If you read their works, the depth of their connection with God, the depth of their purification, the depth of their purification from sin, the trials they undergo as God purifies them and brings them in towards holiness are quite profound. And you just don't meet very many Christians who are really walking those paths. You just don't. There are Christians doing it, but it's really rare. And worse than that, there are many Christians who have no idea that those stages exist and that the ascent is so steep and so promising and so abundant in what it brings and gives. So this video is about humility, but I want it set in the context of what it really means to be a Christian and where we're really led. And the early church fathers saw in the Beatitudes our best map for what the stages are. And so if you've read the Beatitudes, I would say read them again, but this time slow way down. See them as something you don't have. See them as something you have not yet been initiated into. Because on the one hand, of course you have some humility. You probably have some poverty of spirit, right? You probably have some mourning. You probably mourn. You probably have some meekness, right? Like if you take all the Beatitudes together, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you have some of all of them. But I think it's important to realize the person who has humility is sure they have almost none of it. They're sure. And they're wrecked by some of these stages. They're persecuted by some of these stages. There can be, just thinking of some people I know that are being brought through just poverty of spirit and mourning. And they go together, by the way. They logically connect. If you think about this, if you start being initiated into a profound humility, then you start to realize that you are nothing. But it's more than that. See, I think anyone listening without a spiritual director could easily say, I have that. That is happening. At the risk of being too forceful, I want to say you don't have it, and it's not happening. And I can say that, I think, for the most part, based on my years as a spiritual director and having people come in who are sure they have a lot of these things and who don't survive spiritual direction with someone who has a lot more of it than them, who don't practice serious time in prayer where they are exposed to God's power, who many of these people don't ever get past their mind in prayer. So it's really a list of wants, desires, confessions, all of which are good, especially the confessions. But there are dimensions of prayer where your entire self and awareness of self, it's very difficult to say, they just go away. Where you literally leave all of that behind and enter a place of absorption in God, where you're experiencing God's presence and there's no real reference to the self at all. Now, a person who can hit that dimension of prayer, a contemplative dimension of prayer, is able to varying degrees to completely leave their self behind. And it's very, very careful how we say this. We know that in Christianity, the self that God made is preserved all the way, even in union with God. In Christianity, you will remain what God made you to be. God made you, and it is good, right? God created a universe and animals and the planets and stars, and it was good. It's all good. So whatever you are that God made is good. But we have a twofold problem in dealing with the fact that we are essentially good, right? Like we are essentially good, but we're fallen from that state of goodness. It is true that we are still God's creation and we are still good. That is true. But we don't experience anything like the state of being that it would be like to be experiencing ourselves the way God made us. There's been a fall from grace, and it is a profound fall. So we have this twofold problem. We are good, but we are not experiencing that goodness that God made. We get glimpses of it, but all of it profoundly diminished. It's essential you see that as a Christian. That it is essential that you really, but you can't just know it theologically. There has to be your mind and your heart and your body experiencing the truth of how profoundly far we have all fallen. And that awareness should grow as we grow spiritually, not diminish. So that's one problem. But the other problem is that after we fell, at whatever time in history this happened, we're now raised by fallen people. So that, we know that like pretty much the first 3 years of your life, how you felt during the first 3 years of your life, it kind of becomes a baseline into adulthood. And there are ways to overcome that baseline and improve it, but they require deep spiritual transformation. So every one of us, even those with the best parenting, were raised by profoundly fallen and imperfect people. Even the best of us. And then many of us, myself included, were raised by very broken, wounded people. So we're already all fallen, even the healthiest of us. And then there's degrees of psychological and emotional well-being, and all those degrees get pregnant and have kids and raise them. So many of us were raised by fallen people, but also wounded and broken people. And their general state of being, we imprinted on that in the first 3 years of life, all through childhood, but it's really profound in the first 3 years. I consider that to be a part of the fall from grace. So we're raised by very broken, wounded people. And that brokenness, it shatters us. We're not whole. We're not complete. And we start to form in a fallen world that values money and wealth, and power and social status, and sexual gratification, but that's just the main categories. I mean, we've fallen so far that we've created false identities. It's literally true that who you think you are is not who you are. I don't mean. This is so hard to say without it being a conversation. Part of the problem is I want to reach people at a deeper level, but I think it maybe sometimes requires a conversation rather than a video. So just try to hear this, though. Whatever you are is still there. I'm not saying there's nothing there that God made. God is there, and whatever you are is there. There are soul types or personality types, and God made that about you, and you've got your own unique quirks and things, and that's all really real. But built upon that are layers and layers of identity, opinion, and states of being and feeling, emotional states and psychological states, that are all untrue, all of them. And we think of those as us. It's why people fall to their knees in the presence of an angel. It's not just that an angel is overwhelmingly powerful. It's the nature of that power. It's the truth of it. And that truth shines on us, and we experience terror because some part of us can realize intuitively, we couldn't put it into language, but some part of us can realize intuitively that we are threatened, profoundly threatened by this power of God. In this example, coming through an angel. We are profoundly threatened by it. And many people I know have experienced the light of God, the bright light of God. And at a certain level of intensity, it becomes terrifying for most people. Why should that happen? I mean, God is awesome, right? God is profoundly great. But why should we react with fear at a certain degree of intensity, which is really common amongst sincere seekers? This happens to a lot of people. Why does that happen? Or also, why do you think at a way lower level of spiritual advancement, not seeing the light at all, why do you think people resist God when they know God is love, when they know God cares for them, when they know God forgives? Why is there rebellion in the first place? There's a threat there. There's a threat. God is not violent, but it does violence in a manner of speaking to all the lies within us, all of them. The pride. Christianity sort of thinks pride is the primary sin upon which all the others have footing. And, pride of self. And I think that's true. I think that the greatest challenge for a Christian who wants to ascend to union with God in this life and not wait till they die, who wants to bring the light of God to the world in a deeper way, to their children, to their parents, to their society, the person who's deeply committed to a Christian path has a real job ahead of doing violence to the false self. And in Christianity, they won't usually call it the false self. They'll just say doing violence to the self, but it's what they mean. And I always give the same examples. I should get better at it, but just trying to reach you, Most people have a kind of pride in their family. If you pay attention to your family, you'll see that it takes pride over and above other people for various reasons. And it could be that one is very educated and they take such pride in how educated they are. It could be pride in how successful they are. It could be pride in how strong they are, how resilient. And then each member of the family plugs into that pride in different ways and carries it out into the world. And then there are some families that are so broken that while there is pride there, if you look, there's also just a deep sense of unworthiness or less than or shame. And these are all, whether it's being so proud of how successful you are, or wealthy, or educated, or artistic, or creative, open-minded. It could be so many things that if you really pay attention, you'll see that your family identity and then your own personal unique identity within that family structure, it's idolatrous. It's not usually the case that a person is raised in a family where a deep humility and a sense of gratitude for being a child of God in a fallen world and as a fallen person themselves is the primary identity for that person or family group. It's usually something else. And that something else is the family idolatry. It's the false god. And it is the center of pride. It's the form the pride takes. It could be hard-working families. You just name your list. Your family has it for sure. It's sometimes religious, and it's the worst kind. We're Catholic, we're Orthodox, and there's pride in it, a real pride. All of that really does have to be destroyed in order to enter an authentic relationship with God. And all of that has to be destroyed in order to ascend to higher stages of spirituality. And that's why I said most people don't ever get to even past stage 2 in a serious way. Because stage 2 is so now go back to the Beatitudes, okay? Blessed are the poor in spirit, okay? And then blessed are those who mourn. Those two Beatitudes, as I said, are intertwined for a reason. And you have to think about it like this. So if you find poverty of spirit, and I really need to talk about how you can't find it unless you make yourself available to God in a deep way and are willing to court it and listen for it and look for it and hope for it and pray for it, you won't find it. You'll find a percentage of it, 3%, and say, I found a little humility. But you won't find. Each of the Beatitudes is a radical spiritual awakening. Each one. There isn't one spiritual awakening. Someone will say, are you born again? Yes, but again and again and again. All with very different flavors, very different energies, very different gifts that it brings, very different deaths that one has to die to experience them. The spiritual path is long and gives much. It gives much. And so think of poverty of spirit. So poverty of spirit is rooted in the notion that you didn't bring yourself into being, that your very existence is not rooted in yourself at all. This is the theological basis for it. God made you, and God holds you in being. And if God stopped holding you into being, which God would not do, but if God stopped holding you into being, you would instantly disappear and cease existing. The entirety of what you are has no existence of its own, unless it is held in existence by God. And a flippant person, a not serious person, or an uneducated person in Christian theology might take that truth and say, yes, but God will never stop holding me into being, so what? It's as good as if I had my own being. But see, there is where pride ruins everything. And there's where being flippant overlooks the deep things. There's where everything is missed, right there. What's meant to happen with poverty of spirit is that you are meant to, so these are realities, okay? It's really true that you wouldn't exist if God stopped holding you into being. Like, you wouldn't exist if God stopped holding you in being. Well, that's a reality. That's not just an idea. And who slows down enough to begin to experience the staggering reality of that? Who is aware of that experientially, not just theologically, as a point of faith to proclaim? See, poverty of spirit is an initiation by the Trinity that pulls you into a profound awareness of your nothingness. And it for those who are more mystically inclined, that you feel it is heavy and it is low. It feels like you're going further and further down in a deep, vast sea. And it is warm sometimes, but the movement is downward, not upward. You would think spirituality is upward, and it is. But a tree is the best. That's why I like these roots behind me. This is the tree of life, a Jewish tree of life, and these are the roots. A tree is the best symbol for this. Any tree that doesn't dig deep down with its roots is useless and will fall over or never grow very big. This is the symbol for deep spiritual growth, and it's a perfect symbol for the Beatitudes. Seeing God is the trunk, and then the fruits of, being a peacemaker and being persecuted, all the branches, and then poverty of spirit, the root, and mourning is the root, right? Mourning. So here's how it goes. If a person is actually being initiated into the poverty of spirit without generating it on their own, which is unhealthy psychologically and could really ruin a person. If they fake it, if they try to make it happen through their own effort, this will be a terrible project, and everything I say will be destructive to them instead of helpful. But if they're actually being initiated into Christ's humility, into the truth of what we are, which are just creatures held into existence by God who have no power of our own, none, and also fallen creatures, profoundly sinful in many ways, with sinful inclinations on every level, everywhere you turn. A person who is being initiated into poverty of spirit begins to mourn deeply. They begin to mourn deeply. It isn't depression, so if you have depression and you mourn, that's not it. It isn't scrupulosity, so some people obsess over everything they did wrong, which is certainly a form of pride. If you get deep into that person's psyche, you'll find out that they can't accept that they're broken, and that's why they freak out every time they mess up. They can't experience peace, seeing endless disorder in themselves, because they've not found the kind of humility that can just say, "Yeah, of course it's a mess in here. How could it not be? I've fallen from grace. I'm an imperfect human." See, so scrupulosity is really pride. So they obsess over their issues, but it's because of pride that they do that. Okay, so it's not depression and it's not pride, it's this other healthy, really healthy thing, which is a sober realization that you have, that of yourself, you have no good in you whatsoever. None. Even the good of your existence is not based on you and would disappear were God to stop holding you into being. So this is, I'm doing my best to describe it, and I'm hoping even some of the power of it is coming from the Holy Spirit as you listen. But it is a low, sinking, in a good way, feeling. But the false self is terrified of it, and it will experience fear and resistance. It could even interpret the Holy Spirit as a threat and maybe confuse that threat for the devil. It really requires help, sincere spiritual help, to help a person traverse this dimension. And this initiation of poverty of spirit alone, well, we better include mourning into it. This initiation it usually takes a number of years to happen. It's not a quick night of humility or a weekend of trouble and you really learned your lesson and then boom, you have it. It's not that at all. It changes the way you breathe. It changes the way you move in the world. It changes the way you act. People will talk about you the way you were compared to the way you are now. They will see a really big difference. It's not small. It's not something small. It's really deep. And then the mourning, you could see how logically connected the Beatitudes are if you just think about it. As you start to soften and sink down and stop trying to be somebody, I'm no longer, a creative person or a strong person. I'm a professional. I'm an educated person. I'm a professor. I'm a doctor. Whatever you think you are, you start to realize it's all death. It's all dead and it's nothing. And you just start to abandon it and court abandoning it. You want to abandon it. You experience the peace. Under that, you start to taste the peace that comes from that. But you also mourn deeply, because there's a good long period of time for everyone I've ever seen go through this. There's a good long period of time where you are you're troubled by your insistence on remaining prideful, or your inability to stop being prideful, even though you want to so badly, and you just can't stop yet. And also your resistance to the mourning that comes when you look at who you've been. If you're a parent and you go through it, you will see how much, as you start to get free of that pride more and more, there's a change in your vision. And you will see how much of that pride you put in your child without ever knowing you were doing it. It's not even your fault. It's your fault, but you never knew any better. And you'll see the diminishing in them that happened because of where you were. And you'll see the effect it's had on relationships. You'll see the lack and the harm that you've caused, even if you're just a decent person. Decent people are sometimes the hardest to reach because there's nothing overt to point out. But if you start growing in humility, you will see the profound poverty, in your sin and what you've done and what you failed to do. And that vision deepens and deepens as you grow in that humility. And so there's mourning. And in that state of mourning, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." He is talking to you about the process by which the Holy Spirit reveals to you your sin, profound sinfulness, and starts to reveal to you the way out of it, the way to another different state of being that is different and better. And that state of being is meekness. Because a person that, and you can never break the commandments and still have no meekness whatsoever. Nobody who's read the New Testament could possibly believe that just because you were raised religious and you don't commit deep sin, that you have it. It's just not the way it works. There's an entire inner work that has to happen. It's your state of being. You cannot say a sinful thing. So you went to a party. You cannot do a sinful thing and not say a sinful thing and be profoundly sinful. Your entire state of being can be prideful in some way. Well, if the truth is, it is. And every Christian has to know that. Now, people on, let's call this stage a hill, a wall you've got to get through. Let's just say it's a hill, okay? And you're climbing this hill of humility and poverty of spirit and mourning. You're mourning. There's two sides to the hill. You're on the up side, it's very, very hard. People who are not yet through it see this as a real inconvenience to life. You might have been happier before you start this stage. You might be happier. It's no fun to see that everything you do is dishonest. That there's ulterior motives. And I don't mean you're trying to manipulate another person necessarily. You may be. But just one person I know, just as an example, they do lots of good deeds. But it's always because they're trying to be seen as good. And you might say, well, that's a terrible person. But listen how deep it goes. You'll have more sympathy after you hear why. They were ignored as a kid. They were never seen. And so they grow up in life and they have a basic feeling of people don't see me. I'm not seen by people. And they want to be seen. So they do all these good deeds, and the truth is, as they become holy, they're also going to do a lot of good deeds. It is part of their makeup to just do the good deeds. But there's always a lie and a hidden motive as they do them. And the hidden motive is, I need to be seen, no one sees me. And other people get really good at something in order to be seen. So they develop a high level of skill in some, it doesn't matter what, their career or some artistic endeavor or a physical endeavor. It doesn't matter what it is. And those are all sort of good things, although it's questionable how far they would have gone into any of those if they weren't driven by fear and pride. But so in every act that they do is a hidden motive to be seen, and that means they're lying all the time. It's not an overt lie, it's not a verbal lie, but it is a lie nonetheless. And that's just one example of 100 different ways in which what we do isn't true. And you might think, well, who cares? I mean, that's pretty, gosh, you're being kind of hard on people here. And you don't want to take it that way. It's important that a person that comes to this comes to peace with it. For me to say I'm nobody and that it's a train wreck in here, and that I never do anything that's true. For me to say that, I'm on the other side of the hill. It's a relief. It's a profound relief. to be able to say that. It is an absolute relief. There's just nothing to defend. There's just no longer anything to defend. It's just true. But more than that, it's more than that. This thing that looks like a death, you die with Jesus on the cross. In this way, you experience this profound sinfulness and this death of the false self to whatever degree we hope to get it. Because no one has it all, but you experience this profound death, and it seems so tragic at first, and then on the other side of the hill, it seems like such a relief and such a gift and so wonderful, and you're so grateful. But then on the other side of that, and what it is, I would say, the first two Beatitudes is a profound degree of surrender to God's will based on a deep knowledge. It's not a generosity. It's not that people who found the humility we're talking about here, it's not that they're generous. They're not saying, this is paraphrased, no one would really say this, but they might feel it without saying it. I'm pretty great, but I'm so generous, I'm just going to lay down before God and do God's will because I'm so good. That person has not found any humility at all. None. They don't have it. The person who has the humility we're talking about comes to meekness out of accurate self-knowledge. If they have found humility, it's for two reasons. One, they've begun to participate in Christ's humility. It's not even their own humility. They just it starts to rub off on them a little bit, but only because Christ has it, not something they have on their own. And also because they've gained an accurate view of themselves, and they have found it profoundly sinful and lacking. And so it's at the center here, we talk about if anyone gets any humility at all, we say it's not because they're generous. It's for good reason. It's for good reason. And that good reason, the generosity could be withheld. The generosity could be lost. Pride could easily usurp the generosity that would say, oh, even though I'm pretty great, I'll just be humble anyway. That kind of humility is easily stolen. But a humility that is twofold, that comes from God's energy itself living in you, and you seeing the truth of who you are through God's aid and help. That's more secure. It's not that it could never be lost, because no one's perfectly safe. But if you're convinced of your profound sinfulness, if you are personally convinced of that, you're going to be much less likely to give it up, because you're not being generous, you're not being spiritual, you're not being whatever you think you are. You're just not. You just see it. You see the damage it's done. You see the damage it's doing everywhere and everybody. We're all the same. You see the mess. You see that 90% of our strife, culturally, politically, on any level, is completely made up because of our deep and profound sinfulness. And you just start to see it everywhere, but way more you see it in yourself. It's not a weapon you point out and look at others with. It's something that goes within, and you see, okay, so why does this matter? Well, first of all, in and of itself, it is a profound good that makes way less suffering in the world. If you raise your children from that place, you will do a far better job than if you don't, and your children will come out far better than they would have if you didn't. So in every way, relationships, work life, you name it, a person who has that humility is far better off in every way. But it also ties in with the rest of the Beatitudes. So Christianity offers salvation in heaven after one dies, but it really was never meant to just do that. I mean, that is incredible, but it's meant to produce a saint in this life, like a saint, a person who has largely completed the process of coming to heaven before they die. and who is existing in heaven to a large degree before they die. They taste heaven. They know a lot about what heaven is like because they're living in it, like they really are. So I have to contrast this with Eastern spirituality. So whereas Buddhism or Hinduism, about all you guys, I love you guys, but just contrasting respectfully. Whereas Buddhism and Hinduism and most Eastern traditions, their way to union with pure being, I won't say it's the personal God yet, but it's very close. Their way to experiencing and coming to a place of union or enlightenment is really a different project altogether. It's really a project of snuffing the self out. And that's why there's all this theology around there is no self. The self is an illusion. The world is an illusion. None of this is real. It's just a dream from a fall. And in Buddhism, at least, I would say, although there's a lot of different kinds of Buddhism, and someone could come in and give all kinds of caveats, and I would just accept them. But in general, okay, the project for Buddhism is, if there's any sense of awareness of self left at all, you're not enlightened. The self is snuffed out, and that's also true in a lot of Hinduism. So that's their way of coming into union with something that is very close to the Trinity. It's not the personal dimension of God, but it's very close. But they do it by, instead of, so that's how they do it. Then what is Christianity then? And why such a heavy emphasis on that humility? Why so heavy? Why would I make a 40-minute video just trying to get people to see you don't have it and you got to get it? Why? Well, it's because of this. The Christian project has a different kind of union with God in mind, a very different kind. The Christian mystic does not cease existing as an individual, even when the Christian is in union with God, experiencing God's power, God's love, and God's consciousness. Even in a profound experiential relationship with the Trinity, a heavenly one that we can barely relate to unless you taste it. In the heights of spiritual life, where even the cosmos can often seem to be inside of you and God instead of something really big and vast. It's cosmic, yes, but it's a cosmic that includes this vast universe within it. It's that big of a state of mind. We're being led to a place that sometimes referred to as deification in Christian theology. And you don't become God at all. You're not God. And therein lies the reason for such a profound need for humility. A deeply ingrained one that never ever gets lost, because the person, let's say your name is Debbie or John or Josh, Carrie, whatever you're, who you are, the lie gets broken down, and even though you still sin, you really know now that you're deeply sinful and nothing without God, and and you've come to love how it feels to experience the reality of that truth. You've come to love it. You love it. You would never choose to leave it. That initiation, which can take 10 years. I'm not saying it has to. It does, though. I mean, it takes a long time for most people, if they even get it. That initiation it's meant to make it so that Debbie, Carrie, the person, can ascend the spiritual dimensions until you experience yourself experiencing union with God, loving with God's love, being conscious. I know that's such a weird thought, but you're conscious with God's consciousness, experiencing infinite being, because the Trinity experiences its own being. It wasn't given by anything else. The Trinity is being itself. It's profoundly powerful experience, transcendent. It's so much love. Okay, that experience can be had without any pride entering, without any sense of greatness, which would instantly cause you to fall all the way back down out of it. or to become a false prophet or a heretic. That humility, without it, no person would ever be qualified, even able to remain in union with God, remain a human being, a small creature that God made, while experiencing the infinite grandeur of God. And I mean experientially. You experience God's consciousness. You share it. You participate in it. It's why some mystics are so tempted to say, I am it. That's why they say it, because in it I am it. It's so unified. But the Christian project that Jesus brings us requires that the person remain a creature. You're one with it, but without losing your distinct self, without losing you. And that's why, I came from Eastern spirituality years ago, and I would hear, Paul and Peter and these guys. I know they were super on fire, but they just seemed like human, so human to me. And from my perspective, that was such a letdown. I thought, well, they're weaker, they're less. But no. This is God's will for us. You're a normal person. You're just going to be a normal person who can raise the dead. You're just a normal person who experiences profound intimacy with God and heaven, who knows something of heaven because you experience it in prayer and in your daily life. Right? But you're just a normal person. That's the Christian project. To remain, this is why God incarnated and became human. It's why the theology around Jesus is fully human and fully God. Jesus is showing us the way to our state of consciousness, what we're invited to. And nobody gets to climb those ascents in any kind of permanent way without having a deep and profound selflessness, poverty of spirit. Nobody gets to. You can peek into it easily. Pentecostals peek into it all the time. Any sort of charismatic Christian movements can easily peek into some of those higher stages. I don't mean peak like view, but that's it too. I mean just like peak experience. They can work themselves up. I knew one guy that was a Pentecostal, and he was real. He had some of that juice they have. But one of the ways he'd drink a lot of coffee before he would do it, and then he'd go preach. And he's amped up on coffee, and he just said it really helped him get into those states. But see, that's great. That is great. But a saint lives in that state. They don't have to work themselves up to it. They live there, and more and more. To heaven we will go if we are saved. But also to heaven we are going. To heaven we are going. And I'm looking around at the world, and I'm looking around at the state of even Christians, and sometimes especially Christians. And I'm thinking, where is it? What are we doing? What are we doing? The world is in such need of love. Christianity is not a sword to point out at people. It's a light to be given. Okay, so that's the reason for humility. And if you're watching this video, you could get it. The energy could come through the video for sure. But you really got to listen to it a number of times. I tried to give every warning and carefulness about how it can go wrong. But you've got to get initiated into this. You can't just be born again into the brightness of God and then still pass on a certain solid percentage of your family dysfunction to your kids. That can't be it, man. That can't be it. We have to go to work on this, to make ourselves available for the Holy Spirit to initiate us into these stages. They're not practices. They're not cute principles we follow. These are stages of initiation, and they require death and resurrection. that's the video. And I am open, and I'm mostly talking, of course, to the center, but really to the YouTube community, because there's a lot of people I've never met, obviously. If you have any questions, ask them below. I will answer, I think, unless it's so personal that giving you your answer for you could mislead others, and then I would probably exchange an email or something. But I really want to see Christianity grow into what it is, what it's meant to be, and not a shadow of itself. Okay, thanks everyone so much.